Welcome back to Around the 412. We are part of the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I am Tyler, and with me as always is my co-host Smitty. For everybody listening to this on a Monday, we are recording it on a Sunday, but we wanted to wish all the mothers out there a happy belated Mother's Day to all of you out there. Also, the Pirates are playing right now, so we're not as up to date as we will be. But yeah, happy Mother's Day to everybody. We just wanted to get that out there, even though we are a day late.
Yeah, happy belated Mother's Day to everybody in the running for third place and beyond in terms of the best mothers out there, because the best two in the world are the mothers of the two sitting right here. So happy belated to everybody out there. Let's jump right into it, shall we? Let's talk about some Steelers to begin the show. Not a whole lot to talk about, but one piece of news. We knew it was coming. The writing's been on the wall for a while with the Steelers declining Devin Bush's fifth-year option. Not a surprise at all. $11 million it would have cost the team, coming off the injury last year. So now 2 years really where he hasn't put together a solid body of work. He was having a solid second season. Obviously the torn ACL put that to an end. And then in year three, coming off that ACL injury, I will give him credit for coming back and being available, but was not at all the explosive player that we were hoping to see. Maybe another year of rehab and such and getting back out there will do wonders for him here in year four. The addition of Brian Flores to the staff, maybe just a revamped defense in general, maybe that will help him out. I don't think that I said the writing is on the wall for them to not pick up his fifth-year option. I don't think that the writing is on the wall for his future to be somewhere besides Pittsburgh. Like, I think if he comes back next year and plays well enough, I think he could still be in their future plans.
Yeah, it could be like a Terrell Edmonds scenario where it's like, okay, you need to play better for us to give you that contract. And Terrell Edmonds did end up getting that one-year contract with the Steelers. But Kevin Colbert even said it this week. There's two different Devin Bushes in the Steelers' eyes, the pre-injury and post-injury. And I think that's for everybody. There's a clear difference. And we could see it this year on the field. It looked like he was a lot more hesitant in his movements. He wasn't as aggressive or downhill as he used to be. And I think even in his tackle totals, like you could see it. Granted, he played two less games than he did in his rookie year, but his rookie year, he had 31 more tackles than he did in this third year of his. And he had 7 more tackles for loss. I think that just goes with his aggressiveness not being there. I think we saw that his rookie year, he was played extremely fast, very downhill. I mean, he was all over the field. And I think what I've seen last year and what I think everybody's seen, especially the Steelers with declining the option, is that I think he's gotten a little, I don't want to call him soft, but like he's tentative. Not taking on the block. Yeah, tentative is a great word. He's not really taking on the blockers like he was. He's not hitting the holes as hard as he was. I just think that maybe the injury has really gotten to his head, and that's what's been happening with him. I don't know if it's physically. I think mentally he might be like worried about that. Hopefully he gets out of that, but it makes perfect sense why the Steelers declined the option. I don't blame them whatsoever. I would have done the same thing, because you can't give that fifth-year option to a guy that performed the way he did. We need to see that first-year Devin Bush again if we want to extend him. So it's a smart move for the Steelers. I think it's expected. And I think that I hope that Devin Bush has a great year coming up. I hope maybe that some linebacker help, like with Miles Jack getting on the team, maybe that'll help him out as well. But yeah, from what we've seen from Devin Bush so far, it's completely expected that this was the case.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned the Miles Jack thing, because I mean, we were excited about the addition of Joe Schobert and thought that would be a good one. But those two, man, they were like oil and water together. They were just not good. They were not a good pairing, which is completely different than what we thought was going to be the case. But not just Schobert next to him. I think that just the run defense in general, we talked about a lot. Just when you have that poor play in front of Devin, and this isn't making an excuse for Devin Bush because he was bad on his own too, but the surrounding pieces certainly didn't help him out, because he's not somebody that's capable of taking on a guard getting to the second level. He's not going to get released. He's not going to release from that guy. Like, that's not what we're expecting Devin Bush to do. I think if we're able to get to it back, if we're able to get Alu back, hopefully we see some DeMarvin Leal this year and some other pieces that they have along that defensive line, and Miles Jack does help him out. I think that, we could see a better Devin Bush just because of the surrounding pieces there as well. So, I mean, a combination for sure of him on his own and also just hopefully a rejuvenated, revamped defensive unit. Not that they were bad last year, but they were obviously very poor against the run. And the other thing is, will he be able to take that next step in pass coverage at all? because or is that going to be Miles Jack's role? It's going to be interesting to see how they deploy those two together because Devin Bush wasn't a guy that was known for his pass coverage coming out, but I think because of how good of an athlete he was, people expected that he would grow into that role. We obviously haven't seen that yet, and I don't even know if that's something that they're still hoping that he can do.
Yeah, I don't know. What I do know is that the Steelers are really banking on Devin Bush having a good year. Otherwise, linebacker really shoots up the needs in the next year's offseason. Looking behind him, you signed Miles Jack to just a 1-year contract. Besides that, it's a lot of the same guys we've been talking about. Yeah, basically a 1-year contract. But it's a lot of the guys we've been talking about for the past couple of years, like Ulysses Grant, Marcus
Gilbert.
Allen, Ulysses Grant was a president.
Oh man, love that.
Goodness. Ulysses Gilbert, Marcus Allen, who's transferred safety into linebacker. Can Buddy Johnson take that next step? I just think that the linebacker is going to really be dependent on how Devin Bush looks this year. And I think it will probably be a need no matter what moving into next year as well. But you're really banking on Devin Bush to have a bounce back year. We can't see the 2021 Devin Bush again. We have to get improvement from that. Otherwise, not only are we going to have a need, but trading up for Devin Bush is just going to look much more worse than it already does right now.
Yeah, it's going to be hard for him to even at this point return that investment that they put into him. But yeah, it would certainly look worse if he's 4 years here and done, especially with one of those years being pretty much completely lost due to the ACL injury. Yeah, we're going to have to see how this whole thing plays out. But I definitely feel better about him going into this year with the pieces that we expect to have back and the addition of Miles Jack. Hopefully, our boy Ulysses S. Grant Gilbert doesn't get cut from the roster. I said
Ulysses Grant.
The addition of Mark Robinson in the draft too, a 7th round pick, converted running back. We'll see if he's just a practice squad stash or what the deal is with him. They brought back Robert Spillane, so they have a bunch of inside linebackers.
Spillane is still there. Yeah, I completely forgot that Spillane's going to be around.
Yeah, but it's all like this year, and then the future is completely up in the air as to what's going to happen there at inside linebacker. So, we'll see how this year shakes out. But Devin Bush, at least 4 years here. Will there be 5? We don't know. We're gonna have to wait until year 4 wraps up, I guess. But all right, we're gonna move on. When we come back, we're gonna talk about some Pittsburgh Pirates baseball, something we didn't spend too much time on last week with the draft, obviously, and Penguins gearing up for the playoffs. But when we come back, we're gonna talk a little bit about that. Ke'Bryan Hayes not in the lineup yesterday by the time you're listening to this. What's with all these off days for him? Are we okay with it? We're going to talk about that when we come back. This is Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Welcome back to Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm Smitty. That is Tyler. Let's talk about some Pirates. We haven't spent too much time on them recently on this show. But hey, they're not playing bad baseball right now, 11-15 as we are sitting here right now recording this. But Sunday afternoon lineup, we always talk about Sunday lineups, especially when it comes to even going back to Clint Hurdle, but with Derek Shelton as well. It's really a thing around the league, but I think that we harp on it as Pirate fans. But I will say, with Ke'Bryan Hayes not being in the lineup on Sunday, especially with all the postponements that we've had recently, with all the games getting rained out, he's had off days here. And I know that they plan these things out well in advance for when they're going to give these guys rest days. But, the Braves, even with Acuna, have admitted as much that those things are very fluid. They can change that. It's not like, okay, this has to be in Sharpie. Ke'Bryan Hayes is getting this day off right here, even though we had these 3 days off already this week. So I don't know. Where are you on this? Are you upset with Ke'Bryan not being in the lineup? Is it a non-story for you because you know how this process works, or where are you at with this?
I think it's frustrating, honestly. You had 2 off days that you didn't expect to have, and I understand that the Pirates did play 2 back-to-backs this week because of the weather out east. I'm in Utah, but
true.
But this is, to me, just signs that I don't really want Derek Shelton to be the manager whenever this team is competitive.
We've known that, yeah.
And yeah, we've known that, but this is just adding on to it. Like, why is your best player not in the lineup?
Well, Ben Gamel is, so
Ben Gamel is true. He is an absolute stud this week. But I just don't understand it. You've had multiple days off, and like I said, you played the back-to-backs. But why can you not adjust? Even if this was a planned day off for Cabrian going into this week, you saw how the week planned out. Just because you had it scheduled already, why can you not change that? It's not like, oh, well, I said it last Monday, so I'm sorry, Cabrian, you can't play today. Like, that's not how that works. Like, Shelton, you're the manager. You can make the decisions. You don't have to stick with what you said a week ago. Like, these people can play. I think it's frustrating. I don't understand it really. Like, what's the thought process with that? If it was like someone who had played, like if he had played, I mean, like 6-7 days in a row, that's one thing. But there were multiple days this week that they were just off because of the weather. So
right.
I just don't get it.
Yeah, and for the Pirates, it's probably not going to mean a whole lot. But I mean, still, those guys want to go out and win baseball games. They got a chance to win a series here against a really bad Cincinnati team, like potentially historically bad Cincinnati team, and they're not, putting, like you said, their best player in the lineup with an opportunity to do so. So I would like to see them maybe break their own mold here and put him in the lineup in a situation where maybe you weren't planning to do so. Things like this should be fluid. They should be able to change. And the fact they've had a couple off days here, and T. Bryan's had a couple off days here, I would have liked to have seen him in the lineup on Sunday afternoon. By the time that you're watching or listening to this, we will know how it has played out for them. But yeah, either way, T. Bryan Hayes not starting on Sunday afternoon. Another guy that we're not going to see start for an extended period of time, it sounds like, Roberto Perez gets injured in that game, and it did not look good. It does not sound good, the prognosis of this. It's a hamstring injury, but like a pretty severe one. As we know, the variance on that can be very different. But it sounds like it's a pretty significant hamstring injury for him. And in game one of the doubleheader on Saturday, we really saw this come to light in how it can impact the team, because Andrew Knapp had gotten thrown out of the game because umpires do not like being yelled at when they do stupid things. So we're down to Josh Van Meter as the emergency catcher. And that inning went about how you would expect that it would go with an emergency catcher after the Pirates didn't capitalize with the bases loaded and nobody out in the top of that same inning. The Reds put on, 7 runs or so, I think, in that inning, end up winning the ball game in a blowout fashion. But this Perez injury is another Perez, Michael Perez, who was with the Pirates last year, is back this year. He was in the minors, but he's the guy that comes up from Indy to take Perez or Roberto Perez's. Man, this is gonna be tough to talk about this second. Michael Perez takes Roberto Perez's spot on the roster. We're gonna see Andrew Knapp. I would assume that Andrew Knapp probably gets the majority of the work here in Roberto Perez's absence. But man, you're not getting anything offensively behind the plate now. And Roberto Perez was a guy that was a little bit up and down this year. We had seen him just recently. Hit another homer, but like if any catcher was going to give you anything with a bat, it was definitely Roberto Perez. And now with him not in the fold here for an extended period of time, you're going to get nothing offensively from behind the plate.
No, that's the first thing I thought of. Well, it wasn't the defensive part of catching. It was looking at who's going to be replacing him. Andrew Knapp, sub 200 hitter. Van Meter, sub 200 hitter. And then now Michael Perez, another sub 200 hitter from previous years. Yeah. I just think that, I mean, I hope he gets a speedy recovery. That's what I'll say. Because it's not like Roberto Perez was like lighting the world on fire with his offense, but at least he could contribute a little bit. The other guys behind him, there's nothing much there. It's going to be like a black hole on the lineup. They're going to be continuously batting probably 9th in the order. But yeah, I think this is a blow to the Pirates lineup. There's multiple guys that don't perform well, but at least like Roberto Perez was doing okay, and as a catcher, he's pretty solid. But yeah, whenever a guy gets injured like that, you hopefully he only has to stay on the 10-day IL, and not go on like a 60-day or anything like that. But
well, he's probably gonna be on the 10-day IL, but it's not gonna be 10 days before when he's back. I assume that we see a pretty extended, just the way that it's being talked about. I mean, Jason Mackey was talking about it, I believe. he put out a tweet about how it sounds like it's going to be a extended absence for Roberto Perez, and yeah, that's not good. Just from, especially you mentioned like the other side of it, right? Like how he handles the pitching staff. Obviously, we hope to never see Josh Van Meter back there again. He hadn't caught since he was 14 years
I don't
old.
want to see Van Meter in the field anywhere, let alone behind the plate. Okay.
All credit to him for being the guy to do that and going out there and giving it his all. But I mean, we saw like Will Crowe, who wants to be able to throw his full arsenal, probably wasn't able to do so because of Van Meter not being able to handle it. We saw him cost Will Crowe some strikes, and obviously Crowe gives up a few runs there because of it, and he's the guy that takes the loss in that case because of it. So I'm sure he felt terrible, but the situation was the situation, and you got to move on. But yeah, the Pirates are definitely going to be in a predicament here for an extended period of time, assuming, and I don't see that being the case, that they would go out and acquire another catcher.
I don't see the point. I mean, let's be honest. We know what this team is. I don't see really the point in trying to go out and get a catcher. If you were a team contending, that'd be a little different story. But from what this team is, and I think the record shows like 11-15. That's about what we thought this team could be. Honestly, maybe even a little better than what we thought going into the season. So I don't see them addressing it. I think they'll just like deal with it, suck it up, and go through this and deal with the lack of offense behind the plate.
That's an understatement. Yep. Speaking of lack of offense, there was certainly none of that at PPG Paints Arena for Game 3 of the Penguins-Rangers series. We're going to talk about that game specifically. We're going to talk about the entire series. We finally got some depth scoring. Things are looking a lot different, I think, than we originally thought it could when this series was kicking off. We talked about it last week, but we'll talk about it more in depth when we come back. This is Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. All right, and welcome back to Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm Smitty. That is Tyler. Let's wrap up this show talking about the world's hockey team, the Pittsburgh Penguins. They jump out to a 2-1 series lead. When we talked about this series last week, we were like, man, they're going to have 3 games played. Who knows where the series is going to be? Are the Penguins going to be on the brink of elimination? Are they going to have 1 win? Are they going to have 2 wins? Hey, maybe they're going to be up 3-0. Well, they fall in that 2-1 series lead. They take game 1 in triple overtime. Evgeny Malkin scores the game winner there. Game 2, I mean, they played okay for a good portion of it, but it's once again one of those games where it's just like they don't make a ton of mistakes, but every time they make a mistake, it ends up in the back of their net. Some really bad bounces too. Matheson ends up putting 2 in his own net. Game 3, unbelievable first period. The exact opposite happens in the second period, and then they respond. I think the only way that a Mike Sullivan team can respond by just absolutely shutting down the Rangers. The forecheck was as good as we've seen it be in the Mike Sullivan era, in my opinion. In that third period, everybody buying in. Evgeny Malkin creating a turnover on that forecheck that leads to the game-winning goal from Danton Heinen. I mean, where do you want to start with this series? For me, I think first off, we got to go to the net. Louis Domingue is now the starting goaltender for the Pittsburgh Penguins in this series because of Casey Smith having core muscle surgery. He's gone. We did not even see this coming. Just randomly in the second overtime, he skates over to the bench. That's it. He's out. We'll see you. Louis Domingue comes in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up, is that the story from game 1 for me, even though they won in triple overtime, has nothing to do with the outcome of the game. It was that the fact that they lost Casey Smith along with Rickard Rakell, and we didn't know it at the time, but come game 2, we lost Brian Dumoulin as well. But Casey Smith, at first, it was funny because everybody was like, oh, did he pour Lamar Jackson? He have to go like take a dump or something? And
I thought cramps.
Like cramping issue. I mean, you're not used to playing like almost 2 games of hockey, so that would make sense as well. But yeah, core muscle surgery, did not see that coming. I thought this was going to be something that was just a little tweak or something. He'd be back by game 3 or 4, but no, he's out for the remainder of this season. Wish him the best, but that is the biggest thing in this series so far. And Louis Domingue, I mean, the Penguins are down to their 3rd goalie. They were already starting their backup. And what they've gotten so far, I think, is what you can expect from a 3rd goalie. Are there a few goals in like games 2 and 3 that you would like to have back or like to have your goalie save? Yeah, I think so. But at the end of the day, he is your third goalie. How much can you really put onto Louis Domingue himself whenever you know that he's not even supposed to be on the bench in this series, let alone starting in the games? But yeah, I think that the team has performed well in front of him for the most part, outside of a couple periods of hockey, especially that second period on Saturday. But yeah, the fact that we're here, we're up 2-1. I think you could have made the case that if you told me we were down 1-2 or 3-0, I would have believed you going heading into this series. But they were able to steal game 1 in New York. They split, whatever. Losing game 2 wasn't the end of the world. Like I texted you after the game that in 2016 we were playing the Rangers with a backup goaltender in. We split the first 2 games. Now, a starter eventually came back to play in game 3. We have Louis Domingue, but we did end up winning game 3. So to me, there are definitely some things to complain about with the team itself, but the series outcome so far, it's really hard to complain about. I mean, they're 2 wins away from their first series win since 2018, which it's crazy to think about that it's been that long, but we've had a lot of disappointment the past few years, so keep going because you're literally 2 wins away.
Yeah. We should mention that Tristan Jarry is back on the ice. Now,
Yeah,
he's not like taking shots or anything. He's not like fully practicing, but he was working out in the crease. He's been on the ice. So that's the next step. We knew he was out of the boot. Shout out to Taylor for that information. She's so good. She was saying to me, she was 10 seats away from him because he was in New York. He traveled with the team in New York. She was 10 seats away from him. So she walked past and peeked under where he was sitting to see if he was wearing the boot and could tell that he didn't have it on anymore. So that's how we knew that he was no longer wearing the boot.
That inside info.
Yeah. She's so good. So he's obviously back on the ice. You mentioned Rickard Rakell and Brian Dumoulin as well. I mean, to lose a top 6 forward, and I know that we've been on Brian Dumoulin a lot, but he was pretty solid in game 1. And I think the biggest thing with him is when he's playing, for better or worse, that he's going to play with Chris Letang. Even if Brian Dumoulin's not on the top of his game, he gets the best out of Chris Letang, and we've seen Chris Letang and Mike Matheson be what they are. Obviously, they bring a ton individually. Offensively.
They can't play a game together again. They have to be split. Even if Dumoulin is not back for game 4, they have to be split up. They're not responsible defensively enough. They need to be split up. I don't really care who that left side is with Letang at this point, as long as it's not Matheson.
Well, here's what I would say. Because I don't see a situation where they're going to be split up. I don't see a situation where what I'm about to say is going to happen either. But I think Marino and Pettersson need to be deployed as your top defensive pairing, especially with what they've done so far in this postseason, because they've been so good in this series together. And I think that's, let's just transition now and talk about the way that some of these guys have played. John Marino's had his best career game in game 1 of this series. And I think that he's kind of transitioned that to these other 2 as well. He's been really good throughout this series. Marcus Pettersson, same thing. I thought Chad Ruhwedel's been solid. But offensively, now I want to talk about some guys because we finally got some depth scoring. I want to start talking about a guy, though, that hasn't scored yet, but he looks like he's on the cusp every single time he takes a shot, in Kasperi Kapanen, because he looks like a way more confident player so far in the playoffs. Maybe it's something with him in the playoffs, because I thought he was good going back to, up until this point in this series. I think right now he looks as good as he has since the last time that we saw him in the playoffs in that Islanders series. The entire regular season, we didn't see what we've seen in between on those 2 ends there in last year's playoffs and this year's playoffs.
No, I agree. I think that maybe it does have something to do with being in the playoffs, but he looks more confident on the ice, and that's probably the biggest thing outside of his play. We could tell that he just didn't really play with confidence, or it looked like it visually. I think you're seeing that. He hasn't put the puck in the net yet, but you're starting to see him take some shots, and you're starting to see him not just skate up the right wing and pull up like we have seen him do throughout this entire season. He's doing more moves and more methodic offensive plays, really, that whole line. I think that Saturday's game, the depth scoring was huge. I mean, it was great. I think that Evan Rodriguez getting 2 goals, that's awesome. Jeff Carter getting a goal thrown off of him, and then an empty net, but at least he got on the scoreboard. Danton Heinen getting the go-ahead goal, the game winner. I think that it is huge for this team if they can get some depth scoring from them, because in games 1 and 2, and really going back for a month and a half before the playoffs, you didn't get any depth scoring. We talked about that you could take guys from Wilkes-Barre, put them on the bottom 6, and you'd get at least minimum the same production that you would be getting with the current guys. So if they can get all of the guys scoring and not just the top line plus Gino, that would be great moving forward in this series and the remainder of their time in the playoffs. I think that Saturday maybe sparks something. I mean, we talk a lot about confidence with Kasperi Kapanen, and Evan Rodriguez is a guy that we talked of confidence about a lot, and he said that his confidence goes down when he's not scoring, but we saw him get 2 goals. Maybe it continues, and maybe it becomes more of a pattern from these guys. I think that's paying dividends. It's going to be huge moving forward if this could continue.
Yeah, I think that my biggest takeaway from Evan Rodriguez's game on Saturday is he was getting to the middle of the ice. And that's where we saw him do a lot of his damage from October to December when he was on that crazy hot streak. But for him, I think that it is. I think it is a lot about confidence. I think it's the same thing with Kapanen. I think that's the same thing for a lot of these guys. But like, even you mentioned Danton Heinen. To me, he's been, since the drop of the puck in game one of the guys that just, his confidence never wavers regardless of what's happening with him. And he's the guy that kind of brings that defensive presence to that Gino and Kapanen line along with them. Like, I feel like his presence there allows those guys to play their style, and he's just a calming presence on the ice. He's a guy that, you mentioned the Penguins haven't won a series since 2018. He's gotten farther than the Penguins have recently. He played in the Stanley Cup Finals in 2019. So he's been there and done that. He was in the finals with Boston. So, I think up and down the lineup right now, the top line, I know that Sid got a couple assists on some empty netters on Saturday night, but those first 58 minutes, the top line didn't really make much of an impact. They had some good shifts where they were keeping the puck in the offensive zone, but on the score sheet, they weren't having much of an impact. And that's why, Evan Rodriguez getting a couple goals, Jeff Carter getting a couple goals, Danton Heinen getting one, Brock McGinn opening up the game less than 2 minutes in, getting that really weird goal. You need those contributions.
That's why it's huge.
Again, a guy that didn't necessarily show up on the stat sheet, Teddy Bluger, was a menace on faceoffs on Saturday night. And I think that will always kind of fly under the radar because who's going back and looking at faceoff percentage, but especially on ones in your defensive zone, those do mean a lot, because how many goals have we seen the Rangers score from deflections because of taking a shot from the blue line? If they win a faceoff cleanly in their own end, I mean, that's what's going to happen. Those types of plays.
Also, shout out Jesse Marshall. He made a point that I wholeheartedly agree with. Teddy Bluger should be getting the third line center minutes, and Jeff Carter should be moving down to the fourth, being the fourth line center. We saw him get a couple goals on Sunday, but really he's been a liability. If the underlying numbers have shown that his line has been hemmed in their own end more so than everybody else on the ice. And
but I will say with Jason Zucker in game 3, that was a little bit of a different case. Now, can that continue? I don't know, but I fully agree with that. I would just be curious as to how the rest of that shakes out, because then does that mean, like, Jason Zucker's also now on the fourth line because of Jeff Carter, or does Bluger jumping up to play with Jason Zucker and Evan Rodriguez? I don't know how that shakes out.
I don't know either. I honestly don't. I just think looking at the two centers, Bluger should be playing more than Carter is at this point. And that I know that you affect more than just lines when you're affecting the centers, or you're affecting the lines as well. But looking at those two individual guys, Bluger has just played so much better, and not just in the series, but throughout the season. And I think he deserves the playing time as that third line center. But another guy, Drew O'Connor, he should be in the lineup as well. I know Brian Boyle, like, he's been solid. I made the case, like, maybe you shouldn't be taking this guy out of the lineup come playoff time, but he just doesn't have the legs to keep up with the Rangers. And I think that Drew O'Connor, he's younger, he's faster. He should be in the lineup as well. But again, I'm not Mike Sullivan, so what do I know?
Yeah, I definitely don't think Brian Boyle can be playing on the penalty kill. I mean, we've seen how bad the penalty, even when they get kills, it's not, they've had like one penalty kill that I was impressed with where they were limiting the Rangers' chances and clearing the puck. Otherwise, it just seems like they're just, in a fire drill and Louis Domingue saving them. But yeah, I'm with you though. I would have Drew O'Connor lineup over Brian Boyle. I do give Brian Boyle a lot of credit. He created that one Evan Rodriguez second goal, the fourth goal of the game, the fourth goal of the first period, pretty much all by himself with that hit on Schneider on the boards and then getting the puck pass it to Rodriguez to Barry. But Just as a whole, yeah, I mean, you can't. That's such a small sample size. You can't keep a guy in the lineup because of that one play. I think Drew O'Connor's got the legs, and I think he can do the job as a fourth line role. Or a reason that he was sent down. I remember Mike Sullivan talking about it is they wanted him to work more on his penalty killing. So, I mean, assuming that he's been doing a lot of that at Wilkes-Barre, I don't know if he's the confidence or if Sullivan has the confidence in him to deploy him in that fashion. But I think that you have the guys here. To be able to fill that role of that Boyle would leave not being in the lineup and not being on the penalty kill.
Sorry, I was just going back and looking at throughout the games in this series, because another thing, we were talking about penalty kill. I would like to shift to the power play.
Oh God.
I know they scored a couple power play goals on Saturday, but it was the second
First
unit
didn't.
and the first unit has looked awful. Their zone entries, first off, are terrible. They've stuck with the same style of zone entry for the last, forever, it feels like, but it hasn't worked for forever. It really hasn't worked since Phil Kessel was on the team. And Chris Letang leaving him behind by himself. Granted, Chris Letang should be more responsible with the puck. He has to have that responsibility, but leaving him back there by himself, I feel like, has been setting the Penguins up for failure. And that's just because of their zone entry. There's nothing clean about it. I think it's a risky play. And when it's not set up that way, it's just very ugly going into the zone. The second power play unit, I don't know why. Obviously, the players themselves are not better than the top power play unit, but they look so much better on the ice. And I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it's just the top guys don't know how to play that power play system properly, and the second guys can, but the first power play unit has looked awful. I think Rust had one goal in game one on the power play, but there's been a ton of chances for this power play. I mean, we've seen multiple power plays called. I think we've had like 10 plus penalties in these games, or I think it's about 10. And we've scored 3 power play goals. 2 of them have been from the second unit. And like you said, Brian Rust, the one goal was from the 5-on-3. So, yeah, the first power play unit has been just awful. And also, 2 shorthanded goals in 3 games. Letting up a shorthanded goal, I tweeted that out, is like unacceptable ever. And the fact that you let up 2 in 3 games is just pathetic. You have to be more responsible with the puck. You basically have to actually not be defensive on the power play, but at least not be lackadaisical with it. Make smart passes. Don't make it just boring and like, I'm not actually thinking about what I'm doing. Think through it. I mean, you've given up 2 shorthanded goals, and that's not the only odd breaks that you've let up on the power play as well. They just scored on 2 of them. I just think it's absolutely pathetic. That's for the first unit is absolutely a waste right now.
The team as a whole is 3 for 9 on the power play in this series, which on the surface that sounds pretty good, but actually watching the games, you'll see exactly what Tyler's talking about with that first unit especially. But yeah, I think it's just a matter of, it just sounds stupid, it sounds cliche, but simplifying things. I think that's why the second unit has had more success, and they were the unit to score the 2 power play goals on Saturday. It's a case where that top unit kind of deferring to the stars, right? And the Rangers know where the puck's going to go, and they can kind of just try to erase those guys, the way that they know that the entry is going to come through, who they're trying to get the puck to enter the zone. With that second unit, you never know who's going to be the puck carrier. I mean, we see Evan Rodriguez be the guy a lot, but, they simplify things. And they get better looks because of it. Both units only use 1 defenseman on the ice, Letang on the first, Matheson on the second. But yeah, I really don't know how else to explain it other than that.
We've talked about this for years, though. That's the main issue. Is it doesn't matter who's coaching the power play. It doesn't matter who's on the power play. The first power play, realistically, since Phil Kessel has left the Penguins, and this is not me saying I still wish Phil Kessel was on the team or that he would add a lot. It's just since he was off the power play and he was off the team, the power play has gone down significantly. And I think the coaching staff has not been able to figure out how to do this. The players have not been able to figure out to do this. The first power play just hasn't been great. And I think, like you said, they need to simplify it and maybe figure it out. But then again, according to Twitter, you're going to have like 2 of the 3 guys gone. Actually, 3 of the 4 guys, or 3 of the 5 guys gone. Russ Malkin and Letang are all going to be gone. So
All gone.
we'll have a
Yep.
completely new power play next season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably Rodriguez from the second unit. Raquel. They're not bringing anybody back. So,
No.
what's funny is I know that we've transitioned already from talking about the Pirates, and we mentioned the catcher situation. Mike Perez has a 2-run homer in the game that is being played while we are recording this, so that's great. But I want to
Just
wrap
forget
up
everything we
talking
said.
about.
Never a doubt.
He's
He's
going to
just
be
got
great.
that
Yeah.
dog in him.
Sidney Crosby, Jake Gensel. I'll throw Brian Rust in there, but I want to wrap up the show talking about the end of the game and the end of every game where we see like Sullivan is willing to throw that top unit out there in defensive situations because they're also like their best defensive players. Maybe not so
Yeah.
much Jake Gensel, but especially like Sidney Crosby. And
Right.
I don't know how many other superstars you can deploy in that fashion and just say, hey, Sid, we know that you're used to spending the time in your offensive zone. We know that you're used to creating offense. Right now, we need you to be a shutdown center and stop them from getting the tying goal or, taking the lead. How many other superstars can be deployed in the fashion that Mike Sullivan can with Sidney Crosby in literally every possible situation? If he really wanted to, he could be killing penalties, but that would be, a huge risk, obviously, for him doing so.
Right. There's not many across the entire league because a lot of these superstars where they have the offensive skill to be amazing and they're some of the best hockey players in the world, they don't have that defensive side of the game, at least yet. I mean, one person that comes to mind is arguably the best player in the world, Connor McDavid. Would I trust him in those situations? Absolutely not. I don't see him as that shutdown defender yet. Maybe he'll develop that like Sid did as he got older. But there's a few guys across the league that I think that Sidney Crosby could be compared to, like Patrice Bergeron in Boston. Patrice Bergeron, he's a superstar. He's great offensively, but he can be deployed in any facet of the game. You can put him on the penalty kill. Do they have him on the penalty kill in Boston? I wouldn't be surprised if they don't.
I'm not sure about Bergeron.
I mean, I would think Marchand is not as good defensively as Bergeron, so it wouldn't surprise me if he was on the power play. Another one that comes to mind, and I don't know if they do, but Nathan McKinnon to me is the closest thing to like Sidney Crosby amongst these young stars in terms of having that 200-foot game in the offensive and defensive zones. So to me, maybe that's another guy that could be deployed in that way, but there's not many people that can do what Sid does. Barkov as well.
Really
yeah. So, we're naming like 2 or 3. There's not a lot of guys that can do what he does.
Listen to the names that we're talking about. They're the names that you first think of when you talk about like the top players in the league. But yeah, it just came to mind on Saturday watching that game, like seeing Crosby out there. I think it was with Boyle and McGinn at one point, right before Gensel came over the boards to score the empty netter. And I'm like, seeing these three on the ice together, I think it's just like it just goes to show what Sullivan thinks about Sid as, a defensive player as well, not just what he can bring offensively, just his 200-foot game. And he talks about his 200-foot game all the time. And how cool was it? I don't know if you saw any video of it from Sullivan's little availability on Sunday afternoon talking, but he has a Sidney Crosby jersey right behind him talking. Yeah. And it's just, he coaches him. Obviously, he is his coach. But it just goes to show like how much this guy thinks of this guy and what Sidney Crosby brings on the ice, off the ice, and just what everybody that's surrounded him thinks about him.
Yeah, I think you can tell he holds Sid in the highest regard. And also, since we're talking about Sid, leave it to Sidney Crosby to make a highlight pass on an empty net goal. He's the only player in the league that can make an empty net goal a highlight.
Yep. And hey, maybe it gets Jeff Carter really rolling, and then in that case, all he needed was some Crosby magic. But hey, by the time that we talk to you guys next time, who knows where this? Are we even going to have a series to talk about right now? I mean,
well, the series will be over, so whether it goes game 5 or game 7, it will be over. So hopefully, we're talking to you in a happy regard next week.
Yeah. Yep. Also, my sister gets married on Saturday, so they'll have played. Yeah, you're already married, so you know the feel. But yeah Poggers. Yeah, but the rehearsal is the night of game. What game would that be then? Friday.
That'd be game 6.
Game 6. Okay. Yeah. So we'll see. Maybe I won't go to the rehearsal. No, I'm just kidding.
Hey, hopefully he doesn't have to get there. We can win game 5.
True. Shout out to my sister getting married on Saturday. Big shout out. Other than that,
again, shout out to all the moms.
Shout out to all the moms
for yesterday.
for yesterday. For that, for Smitty, for Tyler, this has been Around the 412 on the DT Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Be sure to leave us a like, subscribe to us, leave us a comment, give us a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to. We just recently set up the new link tree, so you can find us on all the platforms out there. I don't think that we have anything else, so we'll talk to you guys next week with all more Pittsburgh sports to talk about. Until then, we'll see you. Bye-bye.